we're going to need a good amount of tea. Right, so it is Wednesday, Mercury's day at 11:11 a.m., which means time for Storytelling Hour. I didn't have time early on to set this thing up, so sorry for just appearing here unannounced, but of course it is announced because every week at 11:11 a.m. Pacific time on Wednesdays here at the School of Earth Astrology, we are live, and I see that a few of you are already here, so it is working. Instead of having a theme today, I thought I would just answer questions. And that together through this method, we could explore the signs of the times. You experience that I'm a bit discombobulated today. Oh, it's been like that for at least a week, if not many years. So set me straight, if you would please, by typing any question into the chat. And as I always like to say, I promise to answer any question so long as you promise to question my answer. Nadine writes, good morning. If that was a question mark, we could assume it was good morning, to which I wish I had memorized Gandalf's response when Bilbo Baggins tells him, good morning, sir, because it's a really wonderful blast of the Tolkien. There, of course, are plenty of things to talk about should you not choose to ask a question, but I'm seeing the names of some really intriguing beings like Nadine and Jackson and Tyler here, fellow astrologers in the house. Andrea asked thoughts on the full moon. It's happening on my solar return. Well, happy birthday. I hesitate in some ways to go into a full moon chart, but maybe we should. Let's turn this into a question like this. What does it mean to have a full moon on my solar return chart? Like, is it in any way special this year if, as the sun realigns with Earth, as it was at the moment of my birth, that the moon is full? And I would suggest the answer to that question is yes, and that there is the promise of a fullness, of a flowering. There's a really interesting cycle that happens over time. You could rewind the clock and see when you had a new moon on your solar return, and I don't think I'm going to get into the dynamics of that cycle right now. But, well, you know what? Let's just answer the question you asked. Let's look at this full moon chart. So a Taurus full moon reflecting Scorpio light, which will happen where I live in the Bay Area of California around midday. And so by the time moon rises at sunset when moon is full, right? Moon will have already kind of separated from that distance a bit. So let me just go back to the actual new moon moment, and we will attempt to express this from a more global point of view by taking our feet off of the ground and using a zero Aries wheel, or a so-called natural zodiac chart to do this. And this works because that degree right there is due east of the center of Earth, not of Richmond, California, or of New York, but of that one place where in all moments, all earthlings connect, the heart of our planet. The spine of Gaia is leaning north towards zero Cancer and south towards zero Capricorn, those cusps of cardinal signs on Earth's cardinal directions. And this is the cardinal direction east, and east is like new beginnings, and that's why this chart is a thing that can speak to us globally. So One reminder we receive from this full moon during your solar return is that you are in a transit of Uranus opposite your natal sun. And so for all of us, this is a full moon who is right at the side of a very game-changing planet. Uranus. What is this planet about? Uranus in Taurus, and very near a very interesting star called Algol, who I think I'll speak about a bit here too, because that will probably elicit questions from others just about the strangeness of this moment now. I want to share with you that my theory and experience, I don't know which came first. The invisible planets like Uranus come to us through the visible planets like the moon. Now, Uranus actually is potentially visible once a year, which is the time when Uranus is closest to Earth because Earth is passing that planet by. And that means the middle of Uranus retrograde, which is now. So Sun opposite Uranus. This is not a great year for Uranus visibility. Why? Because there's a gigantic full moon there at the same time, right? That being said, just because you don't see it doesn't mean you don't be it. And there's a very intriguing thing that's happening. Like, look at Uranus at 25, Neptune at 27, Pluto at 29, 30. Like, these are the last days of Pluto in the sign of Capricorn. We know that Pluto's moved into Aquarius a couple times and then has returned to Capricorn for some unfinished business. But this Pluto ingress Aquarius on November 19th is Pluto in Aquarius to stay. You probably know that on November 3rd, Mars opposed Pluto from Cancer. And there'll be, because Mars is about to station retrograde, 2 more Mars-Pluto oppositions in coming time. And maybe we can get into this a bit today as well. So from Leo, Mars, opposite Aquarius, Pluto, that's January 2nd, 25, and then finally April 26, 25. So that's an image of game-changing too. I'm going to show you, by the time we get there, notice that Neptune has left Pisces. Now Neptune, let me show you a thing about this, and then I will try to let you know why I'm sharing all of this stuff, and you just asked me about the full moon. We're going to go to Neptune's Pisces ingress. And as it is with these outer planets, they'll kind of cross a cusp and then go back into the previous sign for some unfinished business, often, typically twice, sometimes 4 times. So Neptune first came into Pisces on April 2011. And then to stay February 2012. And leaves Pisces for the first time in March 30th, 2025. And we'll go back into Pisces in October of 25, into Aries January 2026 to stay for a good amount of time. Won't leave Aries until 2038, okay? So this is a really significant kind of changing of the, well, I don't want to say guards when I speak Neptune, but changing of like the spiritual force and mystical energies. It's a very interesting truth that in 2026, we will have these Saturn-Neptune conjunctions. The first of these being February 20th, 26. Actually, the only one being then. However, as soon as Saturn comes into Aries, which is happening very soon. So we are looking there. On May 24th, 25, Saturn and Neptune will be cruising together. And so this energy is opening up. Okay, the other thing, Uranus into Gemini. Let me show you that. So that is July 7th, 25, back into Taurus in November, and then in Gemini to stay April 26. Okay. I'm going to go back in time and show you that Uranus has been in the sign of Taurus So we're talking about Taurus since 2018. Okay, so let me go back to now and bring us into this full moon, Taurus full moon. And again, why I hesitate to look at any chart is it's going to be a forever thing. But this is a very important full moon. Obviously, the world's nuts. The great change is happening, no doubt about that. And this full moon foretells that. Does it say that the change will be good or bad? Well, those words are bad and don't often lead to good prognostication. There is definitely game change. And I wanted to just share that if we look at Neptune at this time of this Taurus full moon conjunct Uranus, we will find that Neptune is almost exactly at the Uranus-Pluto midpoint. Okay, so what is that? Why does that matter? Well, while we're here, this is like this midpoint dial. And by the way, in Constellations, I'll be teaching an introduction to midpoint and harmonic theory class in December. So I'll tell you more about that in a bit. But while I knew in just looking at this chart, I can see that Neptune is between Pluto and Uranus, and the moon's in on it because here she is. I didn't see, and now I can, that Neptune's in between Venus and Jupiter, and that Neptune's in between Sun and Mars. So these Uranian dials really can help us tune into some of these truths of midpoint powers. And I'm really glad you asked about this full moon because maybe it's an example that I can use for this introduction to midpoints class that I'll be teaching in the Constellations community in early December. The moon and the sun are aligned here, right? So the sun has the sextile with Pluto, the trine with Neptune, the opposition with Uranus. When the sun is opposite outer planet like this, it's the middle of the outer planet's retrograde. It means that the Earth is passing that planet by, and it means that Earth is closest to that planet. Okay, so Uranus in this particular full moon, which is bringing our the soul awareness to this truth, is in a place of potential greatest opportunity to do Uranian things. Okay, well, what is that? Well, let me say that today, and the full moon is Friday, right? A couple days away. There was I don't know how to say this right, but a government hearing in the United States on UAPs, which is the new word for UFOs. So I actually, for the first time, heard in the short amount of that hearing that I was able to tune into this term immaculate constellations. Has anybody heard that term before? Would you let me know in the chat? Immaculate constellations. Supposedly this is the name for a secret U.S. government project devoted to exploring UAPs, which is unidentified aerial phenomena, or some say it's unidentified, what is the word? Anomalous phenomena. Basically strange shit. And they don't reserve it for the sky alone, okay? Because we have reports of strange UFO type things under the sea. And while it used to just be some random cat in a pickup truck and some kind of shady video, right? Now we're getting, high def cameras and all sorts of things. And it just seems like this is going to break. Now, for the card carrying Scorpio conspiracy theorist like myself, we also have to wonder, okay, how much of this revelation of hidden information is also planned to elicit some other type of distraction or control. That doesn't mean I don't believe in UFOs. It is interesting to see that term itself, UFO, has become, what do they call it? Skunked, right? So you say UFO and it elicits these trigger responses in people who have been told to ridicule the very idea of unidentified flying objects, or just to blame it on weather balloons or whatever, for so long that it's like the word doesn't work anymore, right? So hence UAPs. And the other thing about UAPs, though, is it, I guess, is a more, general term. So anyway, today there's this hearing on UAPs, like the US government. Why do I bring it up in regards to this full moon? Because this full moon is with Uranus. Things are weird. Why do I want to bring your attention in just speaking about a full moon and just get away? Hey, it's a Taurus full moon. It's very close to the Pleiades. Go check them out. Why any of this other stuff? And I should just interrupt myself to say, hey, many of us are actually going to be able to see the moon occult the Pleiades on the night following the full moon, or in the hours following the full moon. So maybe we can find a map of who's able to see that today, and I can speak a little bit more about Pleiadian occultation. It's actually a very relevant. Let's do it now. I shouldn't ever say let's do this later, because I'll never get to it. So let me see. Pleiades occultation, November 2024. In the Sky tends to be a really good source for occultation maps. I'm not seeing their site pop up, though, with my initial search. So I'm at Sky and Telescope. And I know this isn't on your screen yet. I'm dealing with like their cookies nonsense. I guess I'll just accept. Okay, great. Here's the map. Let me put this on the screen for you to see. And then I'll say why I feel like this is also a really key piece of this particular Taurus full moon. Okay, so hopefully you can see that on your screen. Yeah, and so it looks like, I thought California, where I live, was in the mix. But maybe that's not true. Wait a second. No, this is like Spica's dramatic reappearance. November 27th, Spica occultation. Okay, so I'm not in the right place, I guess. Watch the moon occult the Pleiades in Spica too. So the moon crosses the Pleiades this week, then heads east for the year's most dramatic Spica occultation. Well, those two are separated by a great amount of zodiac, all right? So one thing at a time, and I want to be here with the Pleiades. Will this tell me where the Pleiadian occultation can be seen from? Oh, this is a drag. But it seems like a really great article that's actually getting into a lot of the things that I have to teach about that. This isn't the time for it. So let me just say that Pleiades and all kind of fuzzy things in the sky, the Pleiades are like a cluster, right? And we're coming into the time of the year, sun opposite Pleiades, which means the Pleiades are closest to Earth too. Now their distance from the Earth doesn't change too much over the course of the year because they are so far away. But still, it's a pretty intriguing thing to see that this like full moon Uranus, much closer to the zodiac degree of a star called Algol, but closer in the sky. And I want to bring an image of this up. To the Pleiades visibly. And so let me bring this up in Stellarium astronomy software, so I'll be able to show this to you. This is going to take a little bit for me to bring us to full moon there, and then I'll put it on the screen. Okay, so bear with me for a second, if you will. Let me go to November 15th. 1:28 p.m. Pacific time will be full moon here in California. Let me see if I can get this on your screen. And then I will do my best to tie all these bows into some kind of knot. All right, so yeah, not a very exciting full moon at this time in California where I reside. However, that being said, and I've had a bunch of different like eclipse ceremonies where there's a lunar eclipse happening. This is not a lunar eclipse, but just for an example, where the sun is in the sky and therefore the lunar eclipse is not, because lunar eclipses are full moons, right? And the full moon is opposite the sun. So if the sun is above the ground, the full moon is below the ground. That's just how it rolls. Anyway, and in these ceremonies, what I would do is kind of shadow work with people. We would sit with our backs to the light just at the time that the full moon was aligning, and then follow our shadows through the center of the earth to the moon on the other side. So really appreciate this truth that these syzygies, which means the alignment of three things, a term these days typically reserved for eclipse phenomena, but really it's the alignment of any three things. And in the tradition, we use this term syzygy to describe spirit, soul, and matter, circle, crescent, and cross, sun, moon, and earth. Okay, so new moon or full moon. And at that full moon time, it's the alignment, right, of moon, earth, sun, or sun, earth, moon, right? So if it's daytime where you are in the full moon moment, a practice that I personally like to engage with is doing the shadow work, where I will have my back to the sun and follow the shadow, my own shadow, into the heart of the earth, and then try to see through that to the moon on the other side. And it's something I very much recommend. So Andrea, sorry, we haven't yet met, I don't believe, so I don't know how to pronounce your name. I also see you wrote that you loved me on the Gemini Rising show. Thanks for that. It was a fun time to be on there with those powerful ladies. Maybe you can write where you reside, or if you know what time of day your solar return will be, and I'll try to check back in a bit. Anyway, it's only day on half of the earth and night on the other half, right? Half of the earth is always in Earth's own shadow, and we call that night. And so many places on earth, of course, will experience this full moon in its fullness. Let's go to some of those places first. So astro maps will help. I can see that, for example, in Egypt, it's midnight. That's this line. So the moon on high. In fact, it's here near Aswan, where the moon, that circle right there, will be directly overhead. So let's go there if the stellarium will let us. Let's make this a little bit, I want to share the screen in a different way so I can make sure it's on your screen and play. All right, let's head over in the same full moon moment to Aswan. Great. Where the moon, it's like literally we're laying on our backs. Let's tilt our heads back. Or we're lay on the desert sands near the sacred temples, and we find the moon like directly overhead at the zenith, which is that point right there. It's like top of the sky, okay? And let me see what happens if I play with parallax, which is also what we're going to want to do to test about this occultation. It just showed like in full moon time, this would kind of be like the ultimate place on earth to experience it, right? It's a very powerful place on earth in Upper Egypt, which means southern Egypt. This is the Egyptian-Ethiopian border at like near the Aswan Dam, and temples like Abu Simbel. And so obviously this would be a place where we could very much see the full moon in the sky at full moon time. Now, do we see Uranus? And of course the answer is no. Here is Uranus, maybe with a telescope, but probably not when the moon is this close, because the moon is just so bright. I have the planets like supersized here, right? So this is a little more relevant. Now, I wanted to show you the proximity of the full moon to Uranus. I want to show you the proximity of the full moon to the Pleiades, but I also want to push this nifty button, which brings in celestial longitudes, okay? That's like even though the moon is not on the path of the sun, she has her own course, right? So this yellow curve is the ecliptic. It's the path of the sun through our sky. And for the most part, the planets, because our solar system is relatively flat, but the planets all have their own paths, many of them shown here, like this red is the course of Mars, for example. And the silver is the orbital path of the moon. A path of moon crosses the path of the sun at the lunar nodes. So this is like the north lunar node right here where the moon norths across the ecliptic. And therefore we can see that this full moon is not an eclipse because the moon and the sun need to conjoin new moon or oppose full moon near the crossing points of lunar nodes for us to have that type of shadow phenomena. Yeah. Anyway, when we look at a chart and we say this moon is at 24 degrees, whatever, Taurus, we're projecting the placement of the moon down to the sun's path. We draw perpendicular lines, okay? Well, if I go further on that same perpendicular line, I get very close to this star here, which is the star called Algol, the eye of the Gorgon Medusa, right? That Uranus is aligning with, and this full moon kind of brings more of our soul attention to that. And I'm going to get back to that because I think it's a very important, significant part of this particular full moon experience. I think we're already experiencing it, and it's probably going to ramp up a bit. But I want to speak more about the Pleiades too. I'm going to go back to California where I live. Unfortunately, that involves spelling, which I'm currently flailing at. All right. So again, here in California, it is 1:38 p.m. at the time of the full moon, and so no moon for me. It's all sun. Again, if the clouds allow and the sun is shining through, I'll turn my back to the light after letting it warm my heart or asking him to, and I will follow my shadow into the center of the earth and then journey through in that place where we all connect, because this is a full moon for all of us, right? And I'll journey through and look to find the moon on the other side. And when the sun sets, so now I'm just moving through time, and this means the moon is moving through the zodiac, I will connect with moonrise. Full moon rises at sunset, so now it's getting dark. I'm going to align us in such a way that lets me just be with the moon. And just ask Stellarium astronomy software here to confirm for me whether or not I reside in a place where, clouds allowing, I will get to experience some Pleiadian occultation. And the answer is yes, according to Stellarium. Now, and maybe I'll feel this is a good thing, I won't find Maya occulted. Why do I care? Because that's the star that my daughter is named for. But I will get to see Merope, who was one of the seven sisters, occulted. In other places on Earth, this has to do with what we call parallax. Maybe all of the Pleiades will be occulted. And I'm not going to look for that now. I'm just going to continue moving through time, though, and see that Alcyone, the brightest of the Pleiadian sisters, will also be occulted from my local point of view. And then it looks later in time certain that the girl's parents, who are Pleione and Atlas, will be occulted as well. And let's just speed up and I will confirm that that's true. Okay, well now it's midnight. Actually, astrologically fantastic. I stopped at 12:12 a.m. All right, let me show you how that looks on a chart and give you the opportunity to ask, well, why the heck do you care? I asked about full moon, dude. All right, so let me bring this in. And I'm just going to go from this time of the full moon. Let me name this thing. Let's take the angles away. Okay, and then I'm going to show this in a feet on the ground house system, and then I'm just going to move to 12:12 a.m. So, oops, that's not what we meant to do. Just moving by hours, and you'll get to see the sky spin clockwise, just like we saw it happening in the Stellarium software over there. And here's this like midnight-ish time, and it's actually the moon now leaving Taurus for Gemini, which I could have told you because we live at a very amazing time where the Pleiades themselves mark the cusp between these signs. Okay. So why would I talk about hours after the full moon when we're trying to learn more about this full moon itself? An answer is the world doesn't stop spinning for us, you know, and I'm as interested in the moments leading into the thing as I am into the moments that follow the thing and the moment of the thing itself, you know. And so just knowing that this is a time where the Pleiades will be occulted, and in my heart, I'm finding there's a lot of Neptunian energy, dare I say Uranian, Neptunian, Plutonian energy in that opportunity, and I see them very much configured to this full moon. I felt like it would be a good thing to share. Andrea, I'm seeing that you reside in Saskatchewan, and therefore daytime for you as well. Maybe given the changing of the seasons, clouds won't let you even see the sun. Time will tell. I hope you do in your solar return. I think getting out and really experiencing how the Earth's at around the time of your birth each year is a great way to connect through Earth astrological practice. And again, my hope for you is that this full moon offers a flowering for you in your solar return this year. And that's something that has been seeded and has sprouted, is ready to come into its full illumination. And there's something about where on Earth you're experiencing it, that full moon being beneath the ground, where like the land itself, the buried ones want to come through. Maybe you could share, if you'd like, what time your solar return is that day, and I could do a little bit more for you personally, or try to. Okay. Right. So as I explore these many themes, like Uranus being at the Neptune being at the Uranus-Pluto midpoint, basically in our time right now, these are slow-moving planets. This has been happening for some time. And then moon coming into that, right? Moon, sun. Of course, the full moon means the moon opposite the sun. And when, in my fields, the invisible ones, the planets we cannot see with the naked eye, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, beyond, some closer to home, align with the visible planets. This is how they come to us and through us. Nothing is more visible than the sun and the moon, especially the former, right? And so we have this unique opportunity in this particular Taurus full moon on November 15th, 2024. If you're into that whole Gregorian trip, I imagine the calendar would have flipped to Saturday the 16th for some of you. Like we have visitors here from New Zealand currently, yeah? Over the date line and on the other side, where you get to enjoy the blossoming flowers in the fall and in the spring right now, right? Anyway, for all of us, because the signs, they emanate from the heart of the earth, right? When we look at a Taurus full moon, for example, that's a global truth. And moon Uranus, right? So we'll experience this on Earth's surface in different ways. And Earth's surface, of course, is expressing the seasonal changes in different ways too, right? And when we get to have a opportunity for an occultation, well, that's not something that's available to all earthly eyes, right? It's like a solar eclipse. You have to be on the path. I happen to live in the Pleiadian occultation path here. And I did a couple months ago in September, and because the sky was locally occulted by some clouds and really San Francisco fog, I had to get in the car, and I just drove and ended up in, where the heck was I? Hercules, California? No, Pittsburgh, California. Near this museum and this statue of some Pop Warner football coach, and it just had a whole thing. And what I found really kind of along the way by getting a bunch of my words out, as you can see, which is kind of like a necessity for me to connect the way that I do, what came in really clearly for me at that time is that in a lunar occultation of the Pleiades, or of any planet, including the sun, that's a solar eclipse, or star. I would say this would be true also for things like nebula, and black holes out, whatever, But I think especially for things that we can see with the naked eye, because an occultation of something that you can't see anyway, it's a little less, certainly less dramatic and maybe less influential. Anyway, what I learned this night, and I will continue to test this, but I will likely receive results according to my hypothesis, is that the occultation of the Pleiades, for example, allows us to feel moon and like have a soul feeling, like a deep kind of ancestral retrieval of moon, the hidden energies of the Pleiades, or when moon occults Spica, of the hidden nature of Spica. When moon occults the sun, the hidden nature of the sun, which we otherwise can't experience. Now, of course, the sun sets every day, well, unless you live in the Arctics or whatever, so sue me. But for most of us, the sun will rise and reach and rest, right? And so we get to experience night, but that's not necessarily an occultation of the sun in the way that we experience in that most magical time of a total solar eclipse. Even then, the sun and the light persist. Still, I would suggest, well, at least what I learned from the Pleiades and from this experience of moon occulting the Pleiades in September this year, is that occultation allows us to experience more in lunar ways the hidden nature of the object it occults. So what is the hidden nature of the sun? Like, that's an intriguing question, you see. What is the hidden nature of the Pleiades? Okay, well, Pleiades themselves have been long associated with blindness. This is true for all fuzzy things in the sky. And it's because they're fuzzy. Like, the Pleiades are an ancient and a present eye test. How many of them can you see? But magically, the Pleiades have long been worked with for increasing our terrestrial and especially our celestial or our spiritual sight. And I just wanted to mention that I feel a powerful part of this particular eclipse, though it won't happen for almost half a day after the, not eclipse, but full moon, though it won't happen for almost half a day after the full moon alignment itself, is this Pleiadian occultation. There is something that is resonant with our opportunity to experience in our fields and in our tides the hidden nature of increasing spiritual sight. I didn't need to go to a Pleiadian occultation to hear this code in this particular song called This Full Moon Chart, because the very strong conjunction with Uranus which will shortly thereafter be followed by moon sextile Neptune, moon trine Pluto. That moon is with Uranus while Neptune is at the Uranus-Pluto midpoint, that the moon and the sun, that the luminaries, they're in on this. They're forming what we call a trapezoid figure. We can see that the moon is actually parallel Jupiter, I'll speak more about that, but contra-parallel Pluto. Well, the sun is contra-parallel Uranus. If you've studied with me and heard me speak about conjunctions and oppositions and declination, parallels and contra-parallels, there is a deep force connecting those beings. So it's not only the moon and the sun connecting with Uranus by conjunction and opposition respectively, connecting with Pluto in trine and sextile respectively. They're on the same paths. They're on the same parallels. They're following each other's tracks. There's a very deep connection here of this particular Taurus full moon to outer planet, transpersonal, generational, and multi-generational, and probably incarnational beings. Something very transcendent, something incredibly unseen. All right, well, what's happening on Earth right now? I mean, have been any big events in your news channel or in your heart or your experience? Maybe somebody wants to just speak for me. I will ask you all. Perhaps you could just say something about, like, what's the biggest news that you've come across in the last week? Anyone want to say a thing? And it maybe can help us get into a bit of what I wanted to share today. So Nadine says not watching the news. Yeah, would you be if things went the other way last week is an interesting question. It's good for us to never watch the news anyway, because it's not the news, and hopefully people are learning that more. And actually these connections that I'm speaking to, they're opportunities for breaking out of constructs. And Nadine, I appreciate your honesty there. Just like, so I guess I'll have to say this. There was a big election in the United States, and Donald Trump has become the president-elect again, right? And this has some people completely freaking out, and other people completely freaking out in a very different way, and other people wondering, why should I freak out? Am I doing it wrong and whatnot? And I think we should get into that a little bit. I think it's interesting that nobody wanted to write that in the comment sections, by the way. And I appreciate, is it Ilona here who says, it's my husband's birthday? But also wrote that full moon is on your ascendant. So cool. I'm glad to know that that this particular global happening astronomically has very personal alignments for some of you. The ascendant, which is the ground beneath our feet, about as personal as it gets. And of course, the sun, as we saw before. And then something that you share. And there's a statement here. I hope there is a ceasefire somewhere, anywhere, and everywhere. I hear you. It's been interesting to see people wondering, like, hey, why did Harris lose this election? Like, it must be racism, it must be misogyny, and I'm not here to say those things don't exist, but it's like, how about fucking war? Now, the idea, by the way, that the color change in the White House from blue to red is going to promote ceasefire is a bit laughable. So time will tell. I am of the absolute same prayer. But, how about censorship? How about war? Those seem like good things to revolt against. And this idea that we can revolt with a vote, whether or not that's true, I'm not so sure. Then that's trying to take power into your own hands, as far as I'm concerned, trying to shift out of wartime corrupted consciousness is something we should do to the greatest power that we can. Now, I wonder how deep I want to go into the woods here, because I do feel this is relevant to this chart. And Neo, the wise, you asked a wonderful question here, which is, with the moon being out of bounds in these times, does it indicate heightened emotional awareness? And I want to return to that. But Neo, you asked a question when I was on last week that I'm going to have to paraphrase. I had actually taken a picture of it to return to it, but it's going to be too hard to find. But basically, you were like, hey, if this is some kind of like democracy or republic or whatever, why don't elections happen when the sun is in Aquarius? We could take that further, and I really appreciated Winter's response to this at the time last week, which was it's all about power. So look, US elections, I don't know how long this has happened before, and I think it would be a really interesting research project. They are now held always when the sun is in Scorpio. Traditionally, this is one of Mars's signs. And also on a Tuesday, which of course is Mars's day. So that's interesting. And Stephen writes something important here, that the inauguration will be held when the sun is in Aquarius, right? So it's interestingly kind of set up that way. Another interesting thing is if you try to compare, I don't know, larger things to human experience, gestation, like children conceived when the sun is in Aquarius will likely be born when the sun is in Scorpio. So there's something perhaps in this kind of like revolutionary or hopefully kind of humanitarian cause can birth, an election or something like that, or, steer the course of that election. Like maybe there's something in that too. So I wanted to just offer that. But this is going to show up in different ways depending on which Kool-Aid you drink. And I would just like to offer a couple suggestions, because I have clients now who are ready to run for the hills, or like literally just asking me where are good places for me to relocate to because I need to leave the United States. I'm like, okay, why do you need to leave the United States? And they're telling me, for example, that Trump is the dictator now, and that there will never be a presidential election again. And it's like, oh, okay. So that didn't seem to happen the first time. I guess he was just waiting to get elected again, so then he could become all of that. And hey, the guy doesn't have to be the same person he was the first time. It's different now, whatever. But it's like very extreme. And I'm happy to counsel them on cool places on the earth, but also getting into some of the, well, how do you get there? Are you allowed to stay? All those things. And Nadine, when you say he said it out loud, though, no more voting, listen to that statement in context and understand sarcasm, right? So now, as a magician, I also understand that people, like one of the unspoken rules of dark magic is you have to tell people what you're doing to them. Whether or not that's true, that is a thing that is said, and it's interesting, and it makes you wonder about secrets hidden in plain sight. And so maybe that was a statement that's basically announcing and saying, hey, you've given consent to it, you didn't rebel against it. But there are so many moronic things that man has said, not a lover of the guy, that then the other side takes a clip and beams it out, like, listen to what he said. And if you just go listen to the paragraph, suddenly the sentence is completely like softened. And that's one of my recommendations always. So when people say like, oh, this person said this person said that, and you're only getting that snip from the news, right, which uses statements that we will make out of context against us, I really encourage you to go listen to the entire speech. Now, many people are not going to make it through an entire Donald Trump speech. It's a difficult thing to do. Um, Listening to me on one level, not that I'm hopefully not energetically aligned, but might be helpful training because that guy cannot finish a sentence. And I do that, right? It's like before I can finish this thing, I'm over here and I'm over here. So you wrote that you cannot listen to 1 minute of him talking. I would suggest you do. I would suggest you face that fear, face that demon, like go there. And especially in places where you're hearing a quote from the opposition who's using propaganda against the person. Not that he's not doing that against them. That's what they do. Like that's how that's divide and conquer 101 through 808. I think it's kind of our responsibility to listen full way through to what somebody has to say. And what the reason why I would suggest that is because it really helps you understand how much we are being manipulated by people taking something out of context. And again, like I didn't vote for that guy, but I think that's an important thing to do. The more important thing I would say is this: like if you are in a place right now where you are full of fear because of this regime change, write down what you're most afraid of happening. Like write it down somewhere where it will be preserved, and you can just check in with it over the course of the next 4 years. Maybe it's 8, 12, who knows what happens. I've just got distracted by a hilarious comment there. Right, like I was told by a client that what is it? So women's menstrual cycles are going to be tracked through AI. She didn't really kind of finish with, okay, why and where does that go? But that seems pretty much as simple as don't record your menstrual cycle anywhere where it can be seen if you want to avoid that. But also, like, what's the point of that, right? And then somebody told me that women are going to be forced to wear dresses. And I was like, oh, interesting. Okay. So I just say, like, write that down. Like, write the scariest shit down. I mean, I'm personally afraid of some of the mass deportation that's very likely to happen because, people that I love who are here and trying to gain citizenship or wanting to come here. And just generally speaking, like the humanitarian nightmare of sending somebody back to a place that they felt forced to leave, or like just not even offering a place of opportunity, whatever like would bring somebody here, like that's pretty scary. I do also see that and remember that for those in the know, and most weren't because he gave really pretty speeches, like Obama was known outside of this country as the deporter in chief. And I think that's a very good example of something that's really bad, which is to say, well, this guy's doing it. This guy did too, right? Like we're so often divided by that kind of thing and the voting for the lesser of two evils and the like, right? But anyway, I don't want to spend too much time here. I just want to say this. If you are in a place where you fear just the worst, and it's something you can't run away from, first of all, I would suggest this. If you believe that Trump just won because more than half of the United States populace are racist and misogynist, I invite you to go speak to people who voted for Trump and ask them why they voted for Trump. And I would suggest you do that with as many people as you can. First of all, it's going to do many great things for you. One is that you'll realize that there's humans on the other side too. And they are probably worthy of life and love. And that's definitely not what you're being cultured to believe if you're only listening to the propaganda that would keep us divided. So find the person on the street that you like the least who had a sign up, if that's available to you, and introduce yourself and ask. So somebody asked, will I please do that and tell you about it? Sure. Well, I mean, the other thing, if it feels safer, is just go online. I mean, still, it's going to feel energetically difficult to listen to people on the other side celebrating. That's never nice. And I'm going to speak to that in just a bit. But just go see like what people were afraid of for the one that you wanted winning. And again, so Stephen writes here, I believe in vision boards and writing what you want to come to you. Cool. I also believe in destruction boards and magically celebrating that which we do not want. But I also, again, really want people to get in touch with their fears. And so what I did like 8 years ago is I wrote down all these things that I was being told was going to happen. And then they just didn't manifest in my life. And I also, well, let me say that one on the other side of this next thing. And it's a very powerful practice. It is a crazy powerful practice. And by the way, like what you're being told about a person or a party or something on the news, like they're all racist, right? So we heard on the news that this rally at Madison Square Gardens was held there because some Nazis held a rally there in the 1930s. And like, oh, the Harlem Globetrotters play there, right? So maybe Trump is like somehow magically invoking the energy of Curly, who was the short Harlem Globetrotter who would steal the ball. You know, it's like, that's ridiculous. Maybe not. That's up to you. But I would really humanize that. I mean, I beg you to. You're going to find that there are amazing human beings on both sides of the street if you allow yourself to release this like armor of terror that's been constructed literally by what people say. Ends with me invoking Curly. We should get some videos of Curly playing right now. I mean, I've seen Fish at Madison Square Garden. Does that mean that Trump's rally was a jam band New Year's show? Anyway, hopefully you like, it's just so easy to get propagandized into the most like weird places of fear. And that I'm personally, I have a hard time with this acronym that people say of fear equals false emotions appearing real. I think that our fears are valid and worthy and very important. And I also think that if we are willing to turn towards the monster that is running after us in the reoccurring nightmare, oftentimes that monster becomes a cuddly teddy bear. And that's something that we can will ourselves towards in the waking dream as well. And something that's been very helpful for me, and I just cannot encourage it enough as a practice, is to write down your fears in this time of what's going to happen in the years ahead. Like, so for example, if you believe there will be no more elections, and many people do, write that down. And when it doesn't happen in 4 years, as I suggest it won't, are you willing not to be propagandized into that place again? Are you willing to never listen to the people who, through their commandments, told you that that's your reality again and again as a source of truth? Ever again, right? If you do things like this, like again, what I was saying before about like statements taken out, like a sentence taken out of a paragraph and put here and played again and again and again and again. And then you hear the paragraph and you're like, damn, that's not what that guy was trying to say. And with Trump, it's hilarious because he just, I mean, on one level, I appreciate his authenticity, And I don't even believe what I just said, by the way, but he does seem to be not reading off a screen. And I appreciate that, at least. The man says some of the most outlandish shit, and also speaks in sarcasm a lot and other things that I think, like, it's just so easy to demonize somebody and like take and then lose our own minds to it, and it's something to be careful of. So for folks who are like on the side of great disappointment, hurt, and fear, we'll never know what would have happened if the election went the other way. Like, that would be a good exercise if we could biolocate and walk in the other dimension where it did. But you can experience your present in the coming years and balance those based upon what your greatest fears were going into it. And I promise you, if you don't write them down, you won't even remember what they were, because there's going to be new things to be afraid of and the like. So it's something I really recommend. The other thing I would say, again, is like, seek counsel from people on the other side. Right? So like, you've been told, if you listen to anything, that this is hatred, it's racism, and it's misogyny. An example I've been loving to share with people is like, okay, like, these people who voted for Trump, if it was Gavin Newsom versus Tulsi Gabbard, who do you think they would have voted for? Would they have voted for the white man? And by the way, if you think the answer to that is yes, you have not spoken or connected in any way with these people, and you believe that it's all racism and misogyny. And I'm sad for you if you do, because you're losing the opportunity to connect with very real people. By the way, including, and I hate this, like, I hate that this is even tracked personally, because I think it's very racist, but 33% of people of color voted for Donald Trump. So now you can be a person of color and still be racist, but like that's like, I've been watching a lot of what mainstream media people are saying as the cause of this thing, and none of them have said, oh, well, have you considered the wars? Have you considered that people in the Lahaina fires, or in Asheville, North Carolina, and other places that were hit by these hurricanes, got a check if they could prove that they deserved it for less than $1,000, whereas more than $100 billion goes to the Ukraine for war? I'm not okay with that. Maybe you are. And when you're in a place of I'm not okay with that, it's like any change, right? But I've just seen the current sweep too much, and it just, the main thing persists to like personally like believe on the other side. So let me speak to the other side. Like, if you're fully drinking the Coke, the red Kool-Aid, I would encourage you to be really careful not to celebrate too hard right now. And the same thing, instead of writing your fears, because if you're on the side of that, and I watch that media as well, because I'm just really interested in seeing people, like, it's interesting to consider a moment like a Taurus full moon at Uranus and Algol, sextile Neptune trine Pluto. Well, in a way, consciousness, and this is like more true in election time, but it's been so real in the last year, 2 years, 4 years, 5 years. And I really missed this important word, I think, with the strength of Capricorn and the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, Capricorn happening. Tribalism, in the way that folks have been divided. Like, I've been listening to videos of people who are saying they're never going to talk to their father again because he voted for Donald Trump. So, right, families being divided. It's not just the elections that have done this over the last few years, but it has been a directive. And that's really saddening, you know? I mean, that can be like a pretty good evidence of that person's just fucking alien to me. And, you know, sometimes people break up with their families, and we have to understand that. But anyway, this same astrological configuration for somebody who's fully drinking the Pepsi, and I mean that's the blue label, versus the same configuration for somebody who's fully drinking the Coke, they will express themselves differently, right? And by the way, for each of us individually, and that's why it's really cool to follow astrology and know, for example, that this full moon is happening during your solar return, to know that this full moon is happening on your husband's ascendant or on your ascendant, right? Like we get to see where the global thing becomes very personal, right? I know that because this Taurus full moon is at the side of Uranus, that if the full moon is on your ascendant, oh, wow, you've been having Uranus transit your ascendant. You've been having Pluto trine your ascendant. You've been having Neptune sextile your ascendant. I know if this full moon's happening during your solar return, oh, wow, you've been experiencing Uranus transit your sun. You've been experiencing Pluto sextile your Scorpio sun, Neptune trine your Scorpio sun. Do you see? And the moon every month will come and kind of stimulate those. Hopefully bring some like moon juice and bring some ease and bring some grace, but it's not always like that. Like the moon really expands our opportunity in this case to like see Uranus, and Uranus is a pretty chaotic force, you know. Maybe too much of that's expressing through me right now. I don't know how to speak about these things lightly, and there's a lot of things I'm choosing to not to say or trying to not say too. So let me read this. Lifelong liberal independent who voted with Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. So yes, Donald Trump, and would argue this was an open-minded, thoughtful decision. Thank you, Brett, for the benefit of the doubt. Right on. Thank you, BR. Really appreciate you saying that. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty intriguing. You know, we have two people who were recently running for president on the Democratic Party side, Tulsi Gabbard 4 years ago, and then Robert F. Kennedy Jr. this year. Until, by the way, like, go review what the Democratic Party did to Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s presidential bid, and you can see why he was forced to go independent and why he then chose to bring, like, I'd really encourage you to listen to RFK now. And by the way, I'd also be encourage you to be careful with it. So if you're drinking the red stuff right now, what this full moon with Uranus is this is the revolution. This is the change. We've got the executive branch, the Senate, the House, the Supreme Court. Everything's going to go our way. We're going to right this ship in this disaster that's been happening. The border's going to be strong. By the way, what does that mean? Have y'all taken a flight lately? And you get your eyes and face scanned? You think there might be a little bit more of that when the border security increases? Interesting. If you're drinking that juice, you're like, this is going to happen and this is going to happen. And Trump doesn't start wars, he ends wars, which is a cool thing he said that most people have not heard because he doesn't own the news. The opposite force does. You know, that's a cool thing he said. I don't know, like drones were used and bombs were dropped. Certainly not as many in the regime before him the first time through, but, you know, you listen to Marco Rubio on Israel, like that doesn't feel cease war at all. You know, so I'm kind of like in the magically I wish to bring the vision and manifest that reality. But if that's true, then I'm not doing it too well, because I look at the world outside and I'm just like, oh my God. But that reflection, and especially the truth that I have the opportunity of connection with a beautiful partner and her boy who's amazing and our baby girl, and also with folks like you. And every day, almost every day of my life, I sit with amazing people and see how they are tuning to their own growing and their own healing and feeling. I usually say it this way: feeling, healing, knowing, growing, right? I just like, well, it's sometimes hard if I look through the internet waves to have any faith in humanity or our future. When I connect with individual beings, it's like we're all good. And I'm being lied to on these TV screens. So anyway, I would encourage for folks who are really afraid to write down what they're most afraid of. I will encourage for folks who feel like they've won and everything's going their way to write down what you expect. And as much as those of you who are writing your fears, I hope you are disappointed. For those of you who are writing your we just won and everything's going the right way and there's no more censorship and, you know, all of that, like, I would write that down too. And I'm sorry to say that I think you will also be disappointed. I think you're going to see that this whole like Elon Musk, Vivek thing of getting into government efficiency and going after the Fed to make the Fed smaller is going to be the road to central bank digital currency. It won't be called that, but like basically it doesn't matter blue or red. There is this really strong current of control. This is going to get this thing canceled on YouTube. Maybe time will tell. That's basically here to keep us asleep, friends. And the blue versus the red is used as a tool in that way, as are events. So a fear that I have, and I should write this down because I've been long looking to the year 2025, like I mean for 10 years now, with some fear because of a Jupiter realignment that happens in the United States this year. And the last times it happens every 83 years. So when you look from the 1776 chart, it was like John Brown's body, which led to the Civil War. And then it was Pearl Harbor, which obviously led to the United States involvement in World War II. World War I, by the way, was skipped, as well as these million other skirmish or fights and wars that have happened before and after. But yeah, I mean, I've been worried about like a big war in 2025 with the United States involved for a long time. And like, that's a fear that I have written down and I sure hope is proven absolutely wrong. The thing that I'm personally encouraged by is that somebody will win an election by saying that they're going to defeat the swamp or clean the swamp. How do you say it? Whatever. Now, first of all, did he? No. And so it's really fun right now. Sorry, I shouldn't say fun. That's fucked up. But it's interesting right now to look at the whole red crew and like, this is Donald Trump 2.0, and he's not going to make the mistakes he did the first time, and he's not going to put people around him that are the swamp themselves. Thanks, drain the swamp, right? And it's like, yo, I don't know that you drained it the first time, and I'm looking at some of these people that you're appointing, and they seem to be like wanting to make great change too. And then I'm looking at some of these other people that you're appointing, and it just looks like, I don't know, Wall Street and weapons manufacturers. So time will tell. I'm not usually, by the way, this like outspoken, especially in public channels anymore, which is a sad thing that was forced through significant censorship. And so we'll see how that goes for me. I definitely have had videos taken down and strikes against the channel, and I don't reach the number of people that I used to. That might be because of the stuff that I talk about, not because of any algorithm. But speaking of algo, there was a video I put out last year when we had eclipses on Antares and Algol. And this year we have a full moon on Algol followed by a new moon. This is the Sagittarius new moon that will follow this Taurus full moon on November 30th, kind of painting those same degrees that were eclipsed at that time when I was speaking about off with the head and something about the heart. Because Algol has long had associations with decapitation, and that might lead you to some theories of what might happen on the public screen. But what I was seeing at that time, the decapitations were all these children who, I mean, everybody, but I was especially hurt by these children who were masked and who were faceless in that way. I mean, the videos of masks being forced on to crying 3-year-olds, it's like, with no science behind it, by the way. Hopefully you've seen that by now. And if not, I'd really encourage you to go look. And then the heart, if you've had a look, you know what that was talking about in that time too. So it's an interesting thing that this particular full moon, and this is why we want to honor cycles within cycles, is also on a star, Algol, that was occulted not too long ago. And in the midst of the mess, that if you are terrified of the so-called red wave, that brought us here, thanks to censorship and mandates and all sorts of things. Now, by the way, like mandating what? Something that had been forced through in the previous regime, and that guy won the vote again. So I try my best to remain sidelessness so I won't get swayed by optimism one way or the other. And I think it's very potential to remain deeply compassionate for all people, regardless of whether Pepsi or Coke is on the White House table. They're both made of corn syrup. That's where I'm coming from. Stephen, I appreciate this. I listen to an array of astrologers. Gemini Brett is one of those who brings truth and honesty without bias. Thank you. I'm definitely not doing that without bias. I am me. I am opinionated. I'm sharing more of my cards than I typically do right now. But I appreciate that that's your experience of me. It's what I try. I didn't do, let's look at the astrology of the election and who's going to win, because I've never seen somebody pick somebody that they didn't want to win. And it's like when I do sessions with people, I want them to go this way to the thing that's going to make them most happy, but maybe they're afraid of making the decision that's going to get them there. It's very hard for me to just do the science of the astrology without me putting my heart into it. Anna, my partner, and I did we were here on Storytelling Hour last week talking about the truth of Scorpio. And I was speaking a little bit about manipulation. When can manipulation be a good thing? What if we can manipulate each other into being the best versions of ourselves? Would that be good? But it is a time when we really need to be careful with being manipulated. I want to look to some of the comments that came here. We'll kind of get back to this chart. I will just finally kind of wrapping up this issue say, and I love this came in one of our Constellations gatherings recently, or maybe it was here on Storytelling Hour, when, I asked, okay, well, if Pluto into Aquarius is power to the people, what force wants to prevent that? And somebody geniusly said the people themselves, afraid to step into our own power, and hence government. Anyway, Nina says, I think you're doing great as usual. Thank you so much, Nina. I appreciate that. She writes, Mercury, Libra in full swing. Oh, but my Mercury is conjunct Pluto. Guru Rinpoche, prophecy, who brought Buddhism to Tibet. Potential for warmongers and nihilist war that destroy the earth. Year of the Iron Dog 2030. Crazy. Have you looked into... oh my God, what is it called? Just trying to purge it from myself as much as I can. But like the UN's plans for 2030, I'd advise that. Leo Moonlight reminds us that situations don't cause suffering. Our attachment to our beliefs about how things should be cause suffering. I'm very much in agreement with that. And I also know that I'm not going to be forced to leave my home because I was born in the United States right now. And I know some folks who likely will be. And that seems like that truth becomes tricky with this, what I would call a spiritual truth about it's our attachment to the belief that causes suffering, right? So that doesn't have to be an experience of suffering, but it very much could be, right? So this is an interesting statement. I don't have the capacity right now to work on individuals. Humanity chose the hard way, more suffering. My practice is now focusing on averting global annihilation in the next 6 to 7 years. So yeah, you seem, I would suggest, to have the opportunity to write down some significant fears and see how many of those manifest. I've heard a lot of statements like this, and I don't know. I think working with individuals is how we work with humanity. And I wouldn't work on anything, but I'm not trying to make a judgment. I'm sorry that it probably comes across that way. But hopefully that's a recommendation. I said I would promise to answer any questions as long as you promise to question my answer. That wasn't even a question. I'm sorry that I didn't, that I approached it as if it was, because that's a lack of consent. Sorry. All right. Yeah, and by the way, many of you here are in constellations. I think it would be good to take this into our community space where we can exchange and I can hear your voices too. And we can look at some of these things because some of you are making some like really cool points and also some points where I think there's an opportunity to contradict that based upon recent events that maybe will help bring balance. That's my goal always. All right. Anyway, I want to get back to what Neo the Wise asked here. Will the moon being out of bounds in these times, does it indicate heightened emotional awareness? How about heightened emotions? How about heightened north versus south, which is an astronomical expression, as is day versus night, right? Or summer versus winter, of tribalism, quote unquote, or polarity. Yes, and I would suggest that absolutely when the North Node reaches 0 degrees tropical Aries, which will happen on January 11th, 2025. And sorry, by the way, for friends international, Germany, New Zealand, Turkey, etc., to in any way like focus on some United States elections. Obviously, things are happening everywhere, but I think many of you also have been tuning into this happening here and seeing its potential global implications. Yes, yeah, there is great sway in many of the sacred sites in our earth that have been left by the ancients. I would suggest for us to remember the ancient codes, have alignments to this 18.6 year phenomena of tracking the lunar nodes, as we would express it today, through the zodiac so that we can follow the greatest tides of the lunar minimums and maximums and the great lunar standstill cycle. And I think one of the reasons why you would track this is not only to know where you are in time, but to prepare yourself for great swings such as this. By the way, the last time would have been 18 and a half years ago. And so we're back in 1987 was one, and then again in 2006-ish, and now. And so those might be times for us to kind of go back to and explore how lunar maximums express in the earth. And since like the political thing has become such a strong statement, more for many than it was years ago. I think 2008 was maybe when I was most swayed personally. That we can look through that lens and probably do some really solid astrological research. Okay, so let's bring this back to the first question asked. What kind of full moon reading was this, Brett? Awful. Well, hopefully it speaks. And speaking of midpoints, I want to show you something interesting here. Like if we point this dial at Mercury, you get to see a Venus-Sun midpoint, and that's true, of course, for Jupiter as well, because Jupiter and Mercury are opposed, okay? Pluto, Lilith, look, unless the moon is with Lilith or opposite Lilith, we're not exactly sure where Lilith is. So astronomically and mathematically, so I have a little of kind of a tricky time there, but it's here. Mercury, by the way, also said to be in exile in the sign of Sagittarius. That is also, however, said true for Jupiter in Gemini. And so they have a mutual reception while they are exploring places that are kind of foreign to, they're kind of like on a foreign exchange program, but they see each other's countries as kind of opposite to their natural flow. And that's a great educational opportunity. The big thing I would say there, and if we look to Mercury right now, significantly out of bounds. If we look to Venus right now, significantly out of bounds. And by the way, parallel in their out of boundsness in this chart. Jupiter, by the way, we see in parallel with the moon. There's something here of questing truth. And I feel that Venus out of bounds in Capricorn, and again, to show my bias, wants us to ground the heart, to look to tradition, to seek advice from elders. And the thing I would say here, I want to be careful here because I would say look to history. But however, when you look to history, all you get is wars and terrible things. And you rarely get the beautiful things that happened at those times. And a thing I would say, and I want to rewind to what Stephen had said earlier, like, vision boarding. What do you want in this world? What, despite it all, do you envision can be a greater way for you personally, for those close to you, and for your culture and for humanity moving forward? Now, many people, it's like, well, I was making a vision board, but I only had a blue marker and it was just taken away from me. Get more colors. Like, keep dancing, stay alive. I want to read this thing from Alan Watts, and this is especially relevant when we're looking on this current of Taurus moon time. Because Alan Watts, for me, sometimes, especially when I'm afraid or confused, and I usually am, can be just very helpful. There are things that Alan Watts has to say about like how we can't change. I don't personally find those ones to be as helpful, and I sometimes wonder if that's actually the result of Watts maybe having given up and given in to some of his own great challenges. I don't know. Maybe that is how it works. But sometimes he says these things that I just love so much. So there's two I want to actually read to you. Oh, sadly, I don't have one written down, and I can't play it for you, or else the videos will get taken down. So this is one that I wrote as Remember to Dance Anyway, and it's kind of the summary at the end of a long and wonderful speech that he gave. And it reads like this. We simply cheated ourselves the whole way down the line. We thought of life by analogy with a journey, with a pilgrimage, with a serious purpose at the end. And the point was to get to that end, success, or whatever it is, or maybe heaven after you're dead. But we missed the point the whole way along. It was a musical thing, and you were supposed to sing or to dance while the music was being played. Hopefully some of y'all are familiar with like 5 rhythm dance, right? And some of it is like the flowy, watery, but other bits is the warrior hard stuff, right? So depending on where you're living right now, like maybe this is warrior hard stuff music, dance anyway. All right, well, the other bit was yeah, this tale of the Chinese farmer that Alan Watts tells. I guess I'll do what I can. I'm also going to put a link to a talk where they just clipped this bit and put some music behind it on Spotify. So I'll put that in the chat so you could at least go and have a listen if you'd like, and hear it from the horse's mouth, as it were. But it's Watts himself, I assume, retelling a story. The story says of the Chinese farmer whose horse ran away. And the neighbor said, "What an unfortunate thing." But the horse then returned, and he goes, "Maybe." But the horse then returned with 6 wild horses at its side. And the neighbor said, "What a wonderful gift." He said, "Maybe." And then while trying to tame one of these wild horses, his son broke his leg. And the horses said, or the neighbors said, "What an unfortunate, terrible thing." And the farmer said, "Maybe." And then the next day, the government came to recruit the soldiers of age or men of age to go fight a war that this farmer nobody wanted anything to do anything with. And they didn't take his son because of his son's broken leg. And the neighbor said, "What a fortunate thing." And the farmer said, "Maybe." You willing to live there? Whether you've been coaxed into the blue or the red side of a thing, or are attempting some sidelessness, which might itself be ridiculous, or steered and manipulated too, are you willing to say maybe? Okay, so final bits here, friends, and I'm sorry I couldn't get with all of your comments, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you writing. One question was, "Can I ask a question?" Which is the best question there is. And I'm sorry I didn't get that because I am out of time. And I do like maybe once a month I'll do this kind of Ask the Astronaut bits, and we'll see where it takes us. If it's something you enjoy. I mean, I'd stop myself because what do I know, you know? But anyway, let's ask here. I'm just so distracted by so many amazing comments that you have and interesting places to go play. I do want to put this up, though. The propaganda has become so sophisticated, it's overwhelming. That combined with censorship seems suffocating. I can internally combat that, but how might we externally combat that? Speak with people, and not only online. Find people that resonate with us, and don't be afraid to say the things out loud that you're not supposed to say. If they run away, they're not your peeps, at least at this time anyway, and keep speaking until you find the peeps who resonate with you, and you will find your soul fam. And it's only that type of community that can help us make it through, you know? And find interesting ways to say the things that you've been told aren't allowed, euphemistically or poetically or through metaphor and myth, that help you at least move. And the other thing is, if you feel like none of that can work and there's things that you have to say but you can't say them at all, I would say just bring an offering to a tree. So tobacco would be a thing that you could do, or some flowers perhaps. And ask that tree to be just an antenna for you to broadcast your message far and wide. So a few things that I might recommend. Hopefully that lands. Okay, finally, Nia the Wise, thank you. Would love to learn more about Mayan calendars. Awesome. Let's do that sometime. And I actually just invited a couple guests to get into Mesoamerican time systems. Evans agrees. Be authentic and engage. If people leave, let them. If they stay, you have a friend. Yeah. Don't only read off the teleprompter. That's what I recommend. It won't work out too well for you. Okay. Where were we? Right. I want to ask you all this. What planet do you think appreciates staying compassionate no matter what, and also just has a good laugh at things being confusing? And by the way, many planets probably say, pick me, pick me. But I'll ask you, you astrologers and students of astrology, if I say confusion, what planet comes first? And so there are some answers already to the previous question that I want to honor. Kevin, Stephen, Neil all say Jupiter, right? So it's kind of like keep hope alive. You know, interestingly, Jupiter buried hope in the bottom of Pandora's box when he invited all the others to bring the greatest calamities. So as all these disasters come our way, and we're talking about hurricanes and fires, but probably also elections that have you terrified, like in the bottom of that is hope. And I would suggest a pathway to hope is maybe. So Neptune comes in when I ask about confusion, but also maybe. Isn't maybe the most confusing thing? Or is it the most hopeful thing? Now, Uranus can be quite chaotic and insist upon change. And it's probably why new astrology says that while Moon is exalted in the sign of Taurus here, that Uranus is in fall in this sign. That, of course, is not part of the ancient code because the ancients did not know about Uranus. We can see where maybe that makes some sense. Hopefully the Moon is like giving Uranus permission to ground a bit and to remember that well, let me say it this way. Maybe the Moon is bringing a bit of like a rod for the Uranian lightning so that it doesn't have to cause a disaster or like start a fire, but can instead be utilized for energy or at least the study of personal amazement, right? And like grounding the electricity. And hopefully with Neptune, who I hope can bring like maybe said by a compassionate heart with Neptune between Uranus and Pluto now, and the Moon aligning and the Sun aligning to these beings, and the Moon aligning with Pluto, and the Sun aligning with Jupiter in declination, with Mercury and Jupiter in this like counterculture place that they kind of are exploring each other's territories, trying to like explore truth in different ways. I think we have a wonderful opportunity here for this out of boundsness of Mercury and Venus in this time. And by the way, it's interesting that the only planet I really haven't mentioned is Saturn. So let me just show you this one. It's not as strong as it was, but it's certainly strong, especially given the retrograde nature of Jupiter now. This T-square, this mutable T-square in the chart. Don't let Saturn say this means you can't change. Getting grounded used to be a bad thing. Don't fall prey for the idea that that's what all this means. And again, I think if you're willing to voice, like write down your greatest fears, you'll probably see that it's not that extreme. And if you're willing to write your like greatest hopes, if that's your side, then you're probably going to get pretty disappointed. And hopefully this can all bring us into the middle way. That is the great opportunity of polarity. And interestingly, there is no electricity without that thing too. So hopefully this is a time where, looking back, we say, oh, it was so horrific then, but it led to. And may the answer, or the end of that sentence, be the title of our vision board. Thanks for spending some time here with me, friends. I want to mention, and most of you know, that you can head over to geminibrett.com/constellations and join us in the School of Astrology's membership group. Many of you are there, and it's greatly appreciated. It really supports my work, and I have much gratitude for that. But mostly I'm grateful for the opportunity to connect with folks of like heart and mind. And sometimes, especially when the mind's not alike, the heart still is. And hopefully you feel that chord here. I think you would have left if you didn't. I feel that in you. I feel a little ridiculous being the only one speaking here while reading some of the things that you have to say and being selective in what I do. It's not cool. So let's get together and chat about it. In Constellations, by the way, I will be leading a community discussion at 9 a.m. on Saturday, as I do all Saturdays that I'm not teaching. There is an Astro Tarot gathering tonight at 4 p.m. I'm hoping to be there, but Ko has hurt his finger, and we have an appointment in emergency care, or urgent care, so I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to or not. But I created a Zoom link. It's up in your, just type in geminibrett.com/star meetings, and you'll go to that page where you and Constellations have access to all of the Zoom links for all of the classes and all of the things. Phelan was going to lead Astro Tarot tonight, but she kind of made a mistake and thought it was last week. And then once we realized it was a mistake, it was like, it'd be really good for people to be able to meet with some priestess energy that Phelan holds on that day of, election or whatever it was. So what planet was the answer? Says PK. Awesome. With a crying eye. Yes, none of them and all of them. But I think Neptune might be a good planet for us to speak with and to really honor this opportunity that we've lived of Neptune moving through Pisces. I think there's actually a lot of confusion in that, but let the confusion lead to the release of beliefs that would keep us from the experience of the most beautiful things. And yeah, I hope that we're all either pleasantly surprised or let down a little bit. I don't want to show too many of my cards. Discerning Light, thanks for saying that about Koa's finger. I think he will be fine. So anyway, at 4 p.m., I hope to at least come in. If I'm not there, I'm not sure if many of you who are in Constellations here can be. Please go in there and lead the thing. Mani, thanks for saying this, especially because I think I went over the line a little bit earlier, not asking consent and answering a statement, not a question. That's not cool. And I try to practice what I preach, and I try not to preach anyway. Good. All right. So finally, if you're interested in learning more about constellations, we have a class every week. I lead an astrology presentation. Last month's class, it was just last week, was on synastry, astrology of relationships. I'm taking that actually next time to talk about midpoints and harmonic things. I'm really excited to show you how I'm using that in relationship work that seems to have been very helpful so far. I want to just share that also there's a week or once a month presentation from Amala Hall on planet correspondences, astroherbalism. She's amazing. Phelan Shiva's been leading our Astro Tarot jams, and Alyssa Luna, medicine woman, astro embodiment practices, and there's much, much more. And I really hope you'll consider heading over to geminibrett.com/constellations and check that out. So all of it's cool to hear this confirmation that Phelan's class was amazing. They tend to be. Winter, thanks for saying this. And Winter, thanks especially for saying this. One love, let's get together and feel all right. And hopefully do it with somebody who sings much better than that, like Bob himself. That's the key, friends. And regardless of whether somebody put the flag in their lawn that you're like, that's my team, did you meet them? What about somebody who put the flag in the lawn that feels like the enemy? Are you willing to greet them? Are you willing to meet them and release perhaps that belief that you're either with me or you're against me? Because that's the exact force of division that will keep us from the vision. See you in space, friends. Buttons.